Some places aren't on any map. You don't find them. They find you. We were just three friends heading to a cabin for the weekend. Fresh air, quiet woods, nothing strange about it. But Millwood wasn't just another small town. It had a way of pulling you in and not letting go. We heard the stories too late. By then, the knocking had already started. You ever get that feeling when you arrive somewhere new and everything looks fine, normal even, but there's this tiny itch at the back of your mind, like something's just a little off, like the air itself is holding its breath? That's exactly how we felt when we first drove into the town of Millwood. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, just me and three of my closest friends. We were all tired of the city noise, the endless scrolling through social media, and honestly just needed to get away from the usual grind. One of my friends, Jake, found this little spot online, a tiny town tucked away in the middle of nowhere, with cabins you could rent, hiking trails, and a promise of quiet. Real quiet. So we packed up the car early Friday morning, windows down, music blasting, excited for a simple weekend. The drive was longer than expected. Google said 3 hours, but it took us almost 5. The roads got narrower, twistier, and eventually the GPS signal dropped out altogether. I remember Jake muttering, "Great, just what we needed, no signal." We joked about being off the grid, but none of us really thought much of it. It felt like a minor inconvenience, nothing more. When we finally pulled into Millwood, the sun was starting to dip behind the hills, casting everything in that golden, late-afternoon glow. The town looked like something out of a postcard. Quaint little houses with peeling paint, wooden signs creaking in the breeze, and streets that were so clean you could eat off them. But here's where that weird feeling started creeping in. Not a single person was out walking. No kids playing in yards, no old folks sitting on porches. The whole town felt silent, like we'd just walked into a ghost town. I joked, "Well, looks like we're the only ones here." Jake laughed, but there was a twitch in his smile, like he was a little uncomfortable. We found the cabin easily. It was at the edge of town, right next to a dense forest that looked thick enough to swallow you whole. The cabin itself was old but charming. Log walls, a stone chimney, and a porch swing that squeaked in the wind. Inside, the place smelled like pine and old wood mixed with a faint mustiness, like it hadn't been aired out in a while. The power was on, but the lights flickered a bit when we plugged in. Old wiring, Jake said, fiddling with the fuse box in the corner. We unpacked quickly, eager to get settled before it got fully dark. We'd planned to grab dinner at the local diner, but when we walked back to the main road, the diner's windows were dark and a handwritten sign said, "Closed for the week." "Well, that's weird," I said, glancing at my watch. It was barely 6 p.m. We tried the gas station across the street. No luck. Locked up tight with "Sorry, closed" taped to the door. Even the little grocery store was shuttered, and not a single car was parked anywhere. Jake shrugged and said, "Maybe the town's just dead on Fridays, like a Sunday vibe or something." But I wasn't convinced. The silence was starting to feel heavy, like a thick fog settling in around us. We headed back to the cabin, each of us feeling it, a quiet unease we couldn't shake. That night, we sat around the fireplace, the flames casting long shadows on the wooden walls. The wind outside made the trees creak and groan, and every so often a branch would tap against the window like a soft knock. Sarah, the most skeptical of the group, laughed and said, "You guys are just spooked because it's new. It's probably just the wind." But then, just as she spoke, the lights flickered again, and the fire sputtered, sending a sudden chill through the room. We all fell quiet, glancing at each other. I tried to lighten the mood. "So, what's the deal with this town anyway? Why is everything closed? Where is everyone?" Jake pulled out his phone hoping for a signal, but the screen just showed no service. "Looks like we're really off the grid," he said, sounding more annoyed than amused. We decided to call it a night early. The weird silence outside made the cabin feel smaller, like the walls were closing in. Just as I was about to drift off, I thought I heard footsteps crunching in the gravel outside, but when I peeked through the window, Nothing was there. The next morning, things didn't get any better. We tried walking through the town again, hoping to find someone, anyone. But the streets were deserted, doors were locked tight, and windows were shuttered. Not a sound except for the occasional crow cawing in the distance. We found a small bulletin board near the old post office with some faded flyers. One caught my eye, a warning about a forest fire several years ago that forced some evacuations, but it said things were safe now. I showed it to the group. Maybe people just don't come out much, Sarah said, trying to make sense of it. But I noticed something strange. On the edge of the flyer, in what looked like hurried handwriting, someone had scribbled, "Don't trust the quiet." I brushed it off as someone's idea of a joke, but inside it made my skin crawl. By mid-afternoon, the sun was high, but the town felt like a place stuck in a permanent twilight. We went back to the cabin, and Jake suggested we explore the forest trail behind it, hoping to find something, anything, to break the silence. The trail was overgrown, with thick branches and moss-covered rocks. As we walked, I kept feeling like we were being watched. The birds were oddly quiet, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then we heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the rustling leaves. I stopped, heart pounding, and strained to listen. It sounded like someone calling a name, but when I looked around, it was just us. "Did you hear that?" I asked, voice low. Sarah shook her head, but Jake looked pale. "Let's just head back," he said quickly. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere felt heavier, like the forest had followed us home. None of us mentioned the whisper again, but I don't think any of us really believed it was nothing. That night, I lay awake listening to the sounds outside. The wind shifting, the branches scraping, and maybe, just maybe, the faintest footsteps echoing in the dark. Something was definitely wrong in Millwood, and deep down, I knew this weekend wasn't going to be the quiet escape we had hoped for. After that uneasy first day, the cabin felt different as night settled in. You know how darkness can change everything? Turn the familiar into something strange, even a place you just arrived at. We barely managed to put together some cold sandwiches and snacks for dinner. No restaurants, no diners open, and the stores all locked up tight, remember? So we ate quietly in the cabin's little kitchen, the air thick with silence. That kind of silence that makes every little sound louder than it should be. I was sitting by the window watching the trees outside sway in the growing wind. The forest around the cabin was dense, and at night it felt like those trees leaned in closer, almost pressing against the glass. The wind made the branches scrape and tap against the cabin like fingers drumming a slow rhythm on wood. Jake had found this old, dusty radio shoved in a corner and was fiddling with it, trying to catch some signal, hoping for any station. Even static would have been better than nothing. But all we got was crackling noise, long bursts of static punctuated by weird, faint, distant sounds that made Sarah jump every time. "Turn that off," Sarah said. But even as she told him that, she was watching the radio with wide eyes, like she half expected something to come through. We laughed it off, tried to joke around, but the heaviness in the room was growing, thickening the air like fog. The silence outside was almost suffocating. It felt like the entire town was holding its breath. Then the light started flickering, not the usual quick blink, but slow, like the bulbs were struggling, dimming and brightening in an uneven rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. "Maybe it's the wiring," Jake said, but he sounded doubtful. Suddenly, a soft tapping sound came from outside, light, deliberate, like someone knocking gently on the window. We all froze and turned toward the noise. Nothing. Just the dark forest swaying and shadows dancing in the porch light. "Probably just a branch," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice cracked. Then the tapping came again, slower, more deliberate, like whoever was out there wanted us to notice. Sarah got up slowly, moving toward the window. The porch light flickered overhead, casting weird shifting shadows on the ground. She pulled back the curtain just a bit and peered outside. No one. Just the forest edge, thick and dark. "This is creepy," she said, voice low. I nodded. The hair on my neck stood up. Jake stopped fiddling with the radio, watching the shadows too. Then Jake pointed. "There!" We all looked. At the very edge of the porch light's glow, something moved. A dark shape, tall and thin, barely visible before disappearing behind the trees every time we blinked. "Did you see that?" Jake whispered. Sarah tried to convince us it was just a deer, but even she didn't sound sure. Then the temperature dropped, suddenly cold, like someone had opened a freezer right next to us. The warmth was sucked out of the room in an instant. The radio crackled louder, and then, through the static, a faint voice whispered, "Leave. Now." We jumped. Jake reached to turn the radio off, but it wouldn't stop. The voice repeated, clearer this time, "Leave! Before!" Then silence. We sat frozen, hearts pounding, ears straining. Minutes passed. No more voices, no footsteps, just the dark outside. No one said a word, but the fear was real. We knew this wasn't normal. The night dragged on painfully slow. Every creak of the cabin made us jump. The wind scraped the trees like 1,000 fingers trying to get inside. Leaves rustled. Branches tapped the windows. I kept glancing toward the driveway outside. I thought I heard slow, soft footsteps crunching on the gravel. When I looked, nothing. The cabin felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. No one slept well that night. Sarah was pale in the morning. Jake was quiet, like he was replaying everything in his head. I barely slept at all, caught between waking and some half-dream where I saw shadows moving just outside the window. Breakfast was silent. The sandwiches tasted like ash in my mouth. The usual jokes and laughs were gone. Something had changed. The town felt like it was watching us, waiting. We decided we'd stick together from now on and explore a bit during the day, try to find out what was going on. But none of us really believed we'd find anything normal, because Millwood wasn't just quiet, it was waiting, and it wanted us to know. Morning came slow in Millwood, the kind of slow that made you feel like time itself was stretched thin, like the whole town was holding its breath. After the rough first night, we needed answers, or at least some kind of explanation for all the weirdness we'd experienced. We agreed to head back into town, hoping to find someone, anyone who could talk to us. Maybe a diner would be open now, or a store, or just a person walking their dog, anything. But when we stepped outside, the streets were just as empty as before. The silence was heavier in the daylight, if that was even possible. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of silence that fills the spaces between heartbeats, the kind that wraps around you and makes every small noise seem deafening. The few houses we passed had curtains drawn tight, doors locked, and not a single car anywhere. It felt like the whole town had vanished overnight. Near the center of town, we found what looked like the community bulletin board, mounted on a wooden post next to an old bench. The papers on it were faded, yellowed, and flapping weakly in the breeze. Most were old event flyers, missing information or dates. It looked abandoned. Jake pulled a flyer off carefully, one that was a little newer than the others. It was a notice for a town hall meeting from years ago. He passed it to me. I scanned the paper, expecting something mundane, repairs to the old mill, discussions about road maintenance. Then, near the bottom, scribbled in faded ink, someone had written in a shaky hand, "Don't forget the curse." We all exchanged looks. I could tell Jake and Sarah were trying hard not to laugh it off, but the words gave me a chill. Curses are the stuff of legends and campfire stories, sure, but something about Millwood made me think there might be truth behind it. "Maybe it's just someone's idea of a joke," Sarah said, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. We decided to visit the old library next. The building was a squat, weathered thing near the town square, its paint peeling and windows cracked. It looked like it hadn't seen much care in years. Surprisingly, the door was unlocked. We stepped inside carefully. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old paper. Rows of creaking shelves held books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. A faded rug lay in the center, threadbare and dirty. An elderly man sat behind a battered wooden desk. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He wore glasses low on his nose and was reading a thick leather-bound book when we walked in. "Visitors," he said, his voice gravelly but steady. "Not many of those lately." We nodded, trying to appear casual. We're trying to understand the town," I said. "It feels strange here, empty, and we keep hearing about a curse." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it seemed like he might shut us down. But then he motioned for us to sit. "Millwood's got its stories," he began, voice dropping. "Back in the late 1800s, settlers came here to build a community around the mill. The mill was everything: jobs, trade, life itself. But there was an accident, a fire. It took many lives, including children. It left scars on the town that never healed." Sarah shifted in her seat, a cold shiver passing over her. "But the worst part," the man continued, "was what came after. Some of the town's leaders, desperate to save Millwood from dying out, made a pact, a deal with something dark, a curse to protect the town at a terrible price." I swallowed hard, feeling the air grow heavy. "They say that curse is why the town is like it is now, why the streets are empty, why people disappear, why the forest seems to watch you." We pressed him for more, but he only shook his head. "Some believe, some don't, but everyone knows better than to be out after dark." Just then, a loud bang echoed from the back of the library. The man frowned and got up to check, leaving us alone in the dusty quiet. We didn't wait to find out what it was. The feeling of being watched had crept over us again, sharper this time. Outside, the sun was dipping low. The town's silence wrapped around us like a shroud as we made our way back to the cabin. That night, the legend hung over us, heavy and real. The fire, the pact, the curse, it wasn't just a story. It was a warning. And Millwood wasn't done with us yet. The sun was already dipping behind the treetops as we left the library. Its pale light barely warmed the empty streets of Millwood, casting everything in a dim, unsettling glow. The story the old man had told us clung to my mind like a dark fog settling over the town. The curse, the fire, the pact. It felt like invisible chains wrapping tighter around us with every step. We didn't say much on the walk back to the cabin. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was heavy and thick, like the town itself was watching, waiting. Every crunch of gravel under our boots sounded too loud in the quiet. Sarah kept glancing over her shoulder, her brow furrowed, and Jake's hands were tight fists at his sides. Even I felt it, a strange, creeping dread that didn't make sense. At one point, Jake broke the silence. "Does anyone else feel like someone's following us?" Sarah rolled her eyes, but didn't really argue. "I swear I saw a shadow move in the trees earlier." I nodded, unable to deny it. "Yeah, something's out there. It's watching." The cabin came into view, sitting small and quiet among the towering pines. We hurried toward it like it was our only safe place. Inside, the air was stale and cold, even with the door closed. We built a fire, lighting the fireplace with what little dry wood we could find. The flames flickered weakly, as if the darkness outside was trying to snuff them out. Jake sat by the window, his eyes darting to the black line of trees just beyond the porch. "He doesn't like it," he said quietly. feels like the forest is alive." Sarah scoffed, but there was no real fight in her voice. "It's just the wind and your imagination." But then the tapping started again. Slow, rhythmic knocks on the window. We froze, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Sarah moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. The porch was empty, but the shadows danced in the flickering light. Still, the tapping continued, soft but insistent. Jake pulled out his phone and aimed the flashlight toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but all we could see were swaying branches and empty ground. Then we noticed something strange. Footprints in the dirt near the porch steps. Small, childlike. None of us had seen them before. My stomach tightened. We stepped outside into the cold night air. The forest loomed around us like a wall of darkness. The footprints led toward a narrow path winding between the trees. "Do you think we should follow them?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I glanced at Jake, who nodded slowly. "We need answers." So we walked down the path, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. The trees closed in above us, their twisted branches blotting out the moonlight. The air grew colder with every step, heavier as if the forest was breathing around us. Suddenly, Jake's flashlight flickered and died. We were plunged into darkness. We froze, hearts pounding, straining to hear any sound beyond our own breathing. Then a whisper floated through the trees, a soft, breathy voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Go back." We spun around, trying to locate the source, but all we saw were endless shadows and tangled branches. Panic surged. We ran back the way we'd come, the darkness pressing close behind us like something alive. When we slammed the cabin door shut, the silence inside felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the forest was still watching, waiting. That night, none of us slept. Every creak and groan of the cabin echoed like a scream. The wind scratched at the windows like fingernails, and the whispers floated on the breeze, teasing and taunting us from the dark. I kept catching glimpses of shapes moving just beyond the porch light, tall, thin figures standing motionless in the shadows. We told ourselves it was just our minds playing tricks, that fear was twisting reality. But deep down, we knew better. Millwood wasn't done with us. The next morning, the sunlight was weak and gray, as if the town itself was still mourning the night before. None of us slept well. How could we? The shadows, the tapping, the whispering voices, they lingered in our minds like a cold shadow. We sat quietly over stale coffee, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Sarah broke the silence first. "We can't keep ignoring this. Whatever's happening here, it's not just in our heads." Her voice was low but firm. Jake nodded. "We need to figure out what the curse actually is. What's really going on?" I agreed. "We need to find something concrete, clues, anything." We decided to search the cabin itself. It was old, creaking in places, and I had a feeling it held more secrets than just shelter. The floorboards groaned under our feet as we moved carefully through each room. Sarah was the first to notice a slight draft near the far wall of the living room. The paint was peeling badly there, and the floor felt uneven. Jake grabbed a crowbar from the kitchen drawer, and we started prying up the loose floorboards. The wood came up with a dull creak, revealing a small hollow beneath. Inside was a dusty box, sealed shut with rusty hinges. Our hands shook as we opened it. Inside we found old letters, brittle with age. The handwriting was careful, elegant, but faded. I picked one up and began to read aloud. "To whoever finds this, know that Millwood's salvation was never free. The pact made by our ancestors binds us all in darkness. The mill, the forest, they feed on the souls lost here. Beware the night when the shadows move and the whispers call your name. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Sarah looked pale. It's like a warning. Jake nodded grimly. We've stumbled onto something big. As we sifted through the letters, one caught my eye. It described a secret room beneath the old mill, a place where the pact was sealed. We knew we had to find it. The mill was on the edge of town, a hulking ruin swallowed by vines and shadow. The air around it felt colder, heavier, like the building was breathing. We approached cautiously, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The inside was dark and empty, the smell of rot and dust thick. Jake found a loose panel near the back wall. After some effort, we pried it open to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. Our flashlights barely pierced the black as we descended. The air grew colder, the walls damp and covered with strange symbols carved into the stone. At the bottom, we found a small chamber, an altar stained dark with age. On it lay a leather-bound book, its cover cracked and worn. I reached out and opened it, revealing pages filled with cryptic writing and strange drawings, circles, symbols, and what looked like a map of the forest. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the chamber, snuffing out our flashlights. We were plunged into darkness. Then faint whispers filled the room, growing louder, voices calling out names, begging, warning. We scrambled up the stairs, hearts pounding. Back in the daylight, the oppressive weight lifted slightly, but the sense of danger remained. We knew the curse was real, and it was tied to this place, to the mill, the forest, and the souls trapped within. That night, as we sat in the cabin, the whispers came again. Closer, more urgent. Millwood was alive, and it was hungry. The fire had burned low by the time we noticed the voices again. They weren't loud at first, just faint whispers, like the sound of the wind sneaking through cracks in the walls. But the longer we sat there, the clearer they became. It wasn't just random noise. They were speaking our names. I froze, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Jake's eyes were fixed on the window. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's closer this time." Sarah shook her head, trying to shake it off. "No, it's the wind. It has to be." But her hands were gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles were white. Then it came. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the wall, just to the left of the fireplace. Not the window this time, the wall. We all turned at once, staring at the spot. The knocks came again louder. Tap, tap, tap. "Someone's outside," Jake said, grabbing the flashlight. "Or something," I muttered. He went to the door, but when he swung it open, the porch was empty. His flashlight beam swept across the clearing. Nothing. Just the black tree line and the fog drifting at ground level. "Maybe it's animals," Sarah said, but her voice was thin, unconvincing. Jake shut the door and locked it. If it's animals, they've learned how to knock. We tried to shake it off, but it didn't stop. Knock after knock. Sometimes at the window, sometimes at the walls. Always in threes. And then, just when we started to ignore it, the sound came from beneath us, directly under the floor. We went still. "That's not possible," Sarah breathed. The whispers swelled again, rising up from the floorboards, a man's voice, hoarse and urgent. "Let us out." Jake cursed under his breath. "Nope, not doing this." He started pacing, muttering about grabbing the car keys and getting out, but I could see it in his eyes that he was thinking the same thing I was, that the road out of Millwood wasn't the same road we came in on, that maybe leaving wasn't an option anymore. Sarah crouched near the far wall, the same spot where we'd found the box of old letters earlier that day. "Don't," Jake warned, but she pried up the loose floorboards anyway. This time, under the dust and splinters, there was something else. A narrow opening, black and deep. The wood around it worn smooth like something had been pulling at it for years. The air coming from that gap was ice cold and smelled faintly of wet earth and something that had been dead for a long time. Sarah leaned closer. "Do you hear that?" I did. Faint scratching, like nails raking against wood far below. Jake yanked her back. "Close it! Now!" He slammed the boards down, shoving the rug over them like that would erase what we'd just seen. We tried distracting ourselves with cards, idle conversation, anything, but the knocking got bolder, louder, more impatient. At one point, it came from two sides of the cabin at once. Then, sometime after midnight, everything went quiet. The fire popped softly, the clock ticked on the wall, and for a moment I thought maybe it was over. That's when the front door handle turned. Slowly, deliberately. I stared at it, frozen. The metal latch rattled back and forth like someone was testing it. Jake grabbed the fire poker. "Who's there?" he shouted. No answer. Just the handle turning again, and then a single knock on the door. Tap. Sarah whispered, "Don't open it." But Jake did. The porch was empty again, at least at first glance, but the fog was thicker now, rolling in heavy waves, and the forest looked wrong. The trees seemed closer, leaning toward the cabin. I swear I saw a shadow dart between them, too tall and too thin to be human. We should have shut the door right then, but instead, something in that fog called to us. Not a sound exactly, but a pull, like our names being whispered directly into our thoughts. Jake stepped onto the porch. "Do you hear that?" I did, and against every instinct I had, I followed. The air outside was colder than it had been all day, damp enough to sting my skin. The fog curled around my legs, swirling like it had weight. Each step away from the cabin felt like walking deeper into someone else's breath. Sarah came last, muttering that we were idiots, but unwilling to be left alone inside. The clearing was strangely quiet. No crickets, no wind in the trees, just that faint, far-off whispering. We moved toward the tree line, the world shrinking around us. Then, from somewhere deep in the fog, we heard it. 3 knocks. Not on wood this time, on stone. We stopped, straining to see. "Where's that coming from?" I whispered. The knocks came again, followed by a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through wet leaves. A shadow moved, not in front of us, but above, between the branches. It hung there for a second, stretched and twisted before melting back into the mist. Sarah grabbed my arm. "We need to go, now." We turned, but the cabin wasn't there. Or maybe it was, but the shape we saw through the fog looked wrong, tilted, too tall for its own walls. The light in the window flickered like a candle in a jar about to go out. Jake swore under his breath and started moving fast. "Just keep walking." The fog shifted as we moved, and finally the cabin shape seemed to settle back into something familiar. We rushed inside, slamming the door behind us, all 3 of us panting like we'd run miles. The knocking didn't follow us this time, but we knew the forest had. The smell of damp earth still clung to our clothes. The cold hadn't left our bones. And somewhere under the floor, the scratching had started again. Morning came like a mercy we didn't deserve. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No knocks, no whispers, just the faint creak of the cabin settling in the cool air. The fog was still there, but thinner now, drifting lazily instead of choking the trees like it had the night before. For a few minutes, I almost believed it was over. Sarah was already at the table, sipping coffee like she hadn't spent the night clutching a blanket and staring at the floor. Jake, on the other hand, was pacing again, the same restless loop he'd been making since yesterday. "We're leaving," he said, voice sharp. "I don't care what's out there. I don't care if the road's bad. We're not staying another night." No one argued. We packed quickly, avoiding the rug in the corner, pretending we couldn't hear the occasional faint scratch beneath it. I folded the last of my things into my bag and glanced around the cabin one last time. In the daylight, it looked harmless, just an old dusty place. But the air still felt wrong, too heavy for a sunny morning. We loaded the car in silence, slamming the doors a little harder than necessary, like we could shut the night out behind us. The gravel driveway stretched ahead, curling into the forest. I'd never been so glad to see it. Jake started the engine, and we rolled forward. The cabin vanished in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the trees. For the first mile or two, no one spoke. The road wound through tall pines, sunlight breaking through in narrow golden slants. I started to breathe easier. Then we passed the first sign. It was wooden, weathered, with peeling white paint. Millwood, population 312. I frowned. Wasn't it 1,200 yesterday? Jake glanced at it, then at me. "Yeah, I thought so too." "Maybe we read it wrong," Sarah muttered, but I could hear the unease in her voice. We drove on, the trees thinned, giving way to familiar farmland. I recognized the old red barn we'd passed coming in, only now its roof was caved in, the walls leaning at an angle. Weeds choked the field where I'd seen cattle grazing less than 48 hours ago. The air smelled different too, damp like the cabin had. The sunlight felt weaker, as if it had to push through something invisible. We reached the town limits, and that's when the real wrongness set in. Millwood was still there. Same layout, same Main Street. But the buildings, they weren't right. The hardware store's windows were boarded up. The diner's sign hung by one chain, swinging gently in the breeze. Weeds sprouted through cracks in the sidewalk. "Where is everybody?" Sarah whispered. Jake slowed the car. We passed the town square, empty. No cars, no voices, no movement at all. Then I saw the church. When we'd arrived, its white steeple had shone like a postcard. Now it was blackened, charred, as if it had burned long ago. The bell tower was nothing but a hollow frame. Jake pulled over. "This isn't possible," he said. "We were just here." We got out, standing in the middle of Main Street. The wind carried the faintest sound, almost like the distant murmur of a crowd. We turned toward it, but there was no one there. Sarah's voice was shaky. I think they're still here, just not now." "What does that even mean?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed. Across the street, in the diner's dusty front window, 3 handprints smeared the glass from the inside. They were fresh. We backed away slowly. That's when I noticed the poster nailed to the telephone pole. The paper was yellowed, edges curling. Missing, 3 travelers. Beneath the heading were 3 grainy photographs. It was us. The dates printed under our names were from 1979. Jake ripped it down, swearing, "We're leaving, now." We piled back into the car, but as we drove toward the far end of town, I noticed something else. Every sign pointing to Highway 12 was missing. In its place, crudely painted arrows pointed back towards the forest. The road narrowed, the trees crowding in again. The sunlight dimmed. I checked the map on my phone. No signal. The screen flickered for a second before going black entirely. Jake's hands tightened on the wheel. "We'll just keep going straight." But straight didn't stay straight. The road curved, split, rejoined itself in ways that made no sense. Twice, we passed the same leaning red barn, even though we hadn't turned around. After the third time, Jake slammed the brakes. "We're not getting out of here, are we?" The silence that followed was heavier than any knock or whisper. Sarah finally spoke, her voice small. I think Millwood doesn't let you leave. It just changes where it keeps you." We sat there for a long moment, the car idling. Then, somewhere in the trees, 3 slow knocks echoed. Not on wood, but deep, metallic, like they were inside something hollow. The sound came again, closer. Jake shifted into reverse without a word, turning the car around. Back toward the cabin, back toward whatever was waiting for us. We didn't speak much on the drive back. I don't think any of us wanted to admit out loud that the cabin felt like the only place left to go, even if we hated every shadow inside it. The road twisted tighter as the trees closed in, the light fading even though it was barely mid-afternoon. At one point, Jake swore under his breath, claiming the pines looked taller than before, their trunks bending slightly toward the car. I told him it was just his nerves. I didn't believe myself. After what felt like hours, the cabin came into view through the thinning trees. Only, it wasn't the same. The structure was still there, but it looked older, much older. The roof sagged like a tired spine, shingles missing in patches. The porch boards were warped and gray. The chimney was cracked, leaning slightly to one side. And yet, the lantern in the window still glowed faintly. "Wasn't the paint red?" Sarah asked, her voice thin. "It was," I said. Now it was bare wood, gray and splintered. Jake slowed the car to a crawl. "It's like it's been sitting here empty for decades." We pulled up in front. The air felt heavier again, as if the fog, even though we couldn't see it, was pressing against our skin. I stepped out first. The grass under my boots was brittle, crunching like dead leaves, even though it had rained just a couple of nights ago. A smell hit me as I climbed the porch steps, that same damp earth and rot from under the floorboards. The door was already cracked open. I hesitated, looking back at Jake and Sarah. Jake shook his head. "I don't like this." "Neither do I," said, pushing it open anyway. Inside, the cabin looked wrong. The furniture was in the same places, but it wasn't ours. The couch was a different color, the table round instead of square. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust, and cobwebs hung thick in the corners. A fireplace stood cold and empty. The rug in the corner was gone. I froze. The bare floor showed the exact spot where we'd found the loose boards, only now they were nailed down with thick, rusted spikes. Whoever had sealed it wanted whatever was underneath to stay there. Sarah walked to the wall where we'd heard the knocking that first night. She touched it like she expected to feel a pulse. "It's like we're in the same place, but not the same time," she murmured. Jake was looking around, his jaw tight. "Something's off, really off." That's when we noticed the photos. They were framed and hanging on the far wall, where the shelves had been in our version of the cabin. Black and white portraits, faded but clear enough to see faces. 3 people in each picture, different groups, different decades, all with the same expression, staring straight into the camera, eyes wide, like they'd been caught mid-fear. The last photo made my stomach drop. It was us, standing in the doorway, bags in hand, the night we arrived. Only none of us remembered posing for it. Sarah stepped closer to the frame. "How is that?" She didn't finish because the sound came again. Scratch, 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 from under the floorboards. Jake backed toward the door. "We're not staying here." But as soon as he touched the doorknob, the lantern in the window went out. The room dimmed instantly, like the light had been sucked from the air itself. And then the boards under the rugless corner began to shift. I swear I saw the nails twitch, working their way upward. Something underneath was pushing, hard. Sarah stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The scratching turned into pounding. The wood bulged. "Go!" Jake shouted. We ran out onto the porch, but the forest wasn't the same. The trees were packed closer, their branches knitted together overhead, turning the afternoon into a kind of twilight. The path to the road was gone, swallowed by roots and undergrowth. Behind us, the pounding from inside the cabin grew faster, more desperate. Then it stopped. For a moment, the silence was worse, and that's when the voice came. Low, male, drawn out. "Not yet." It came directly from under the porch. Jake grabbed my arm. "Move!" We pushed through the brush, making our own path, branches whipping our faces. The deeper we went, the more the forest tilted. Not literally, but in the way it felt. The ground sloped in directions that didn't match the pull of gravity. The trees creaked like they were shifting closer together, sealing us in. We stumbled into a small clearing and stopped. There, in the center, was the cabin. Not behind us, not back the way we came, right in front of us. Only now, the lantern in the window was lit again. Jake swore and stepped back. "This isn't possible." Sarah turned in a slow circle, panic in her eyes. "We didn't turn around. We didn't." We watched in silence as the front door slowly swung open. Inside, it was dark, darker than it should have been. Like the space beyond the doorway wasn't just shadow, but something deeper, a place where light didn't exist. The smell hit us again, stronger now. Damp earth, rot, something metallic, like old blood. Then the knocking started once more, but this time it wasn't from inside the cabin. It was coming from the trees around us. Dozens of knocks, all at once, echoing in threes. Some high, some low, some impossibly deep. The rhythm surrounded us. I don't know which of us moved first, but somehow we were back on the porch, back staring into that doorway. The air inside seemed to move, like it was breathing. Sarah whispered, "If we don't go in, it's not going to stop." Jake clenched his fists, "And if we do, we're not coming out." We stood there, caught between two choices, neither of them good. The knocking slowed. 2 knocks. 1 knock. Silence. Then the voice again, closer this time, almost in my ear. "It's time." And before I could decide whether to run or step inside, the porch beneath us groaned, and something started to push up from underneath. The boards under our feet buckled. Not enough to throw us off balance, but enough to let us know whatever was down there, it wasn't small. Jake grabbed my wrist. Run! But there was nowhere to run to. The forest had closed in behind us, the trees like a wall of black. The air was thick, almost hard to breathe. My legs felt heavy, like wading through mud. Another shove from below rattled the porch. Nails squealed in their sockets. Then, silence. We stood there, braced, waiting. That's when the front door creaked wider, slow, as if someone wanted us to hear every hinge groan. The darkness inside didn't look like shadow anymore. It looked solid. And deep in that black, a shape moved. I couldn't tell what it was, tall but wrong. Its edges shifted like smoke in a breeze. But the eyes, they were there. Two pale, round glints fixed on us. Sarah whimpered and backed into Jake. He didn't move. Then the thing in the doorway stepped aside. That's when we saw it, the open hatch in the floor, the one under the rug. Only it wasn't just a small space anymore. It yawned open like the mouth of a cave. Edges splintered, boards twisted outward. I could see stairs leading down into the dark. The voice came again. Down. The word rolled through me like a cold wave. It wasn't just sound, it was inside my head. Sarah shook her head. No, I'm not. She froze mid-sentence. Because from the trees behind us came a new sound. Dozens of footsteps, slow and synchronized. Leaves crunching, branches snapping. Something, or many somethings, walking closer. Jake cursed under his breath. Inside, now. We ran. The porch groaned under our weight, and the second we crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind us. The room smelled stronger now. Wet earth, mold, and that metallic tang. I kept my eyes off the photos on the wall. I didn't want to know if they'd changed again. The hatch gaped at our feet. Cold air drifted up from it, damp enough to bead moisture on my skin. The stairs vanished after a few steps, swallowed by darkness. Behind us, something heavy landed on the porch, then another, then many more. The knocking returned, not in threes this time, but in a fast, chaotic rhythm, as if dozens of fists were hammering the walls. The voice cut through it all, louder now. Down. Jake glanced at me. If we stay here, whatever's outside gets in. And if we go down? I asked. He didn't answer. The first stair groaned under Jake's weight as he stepped onto it. The sound of knocking faded, like the noise didn't want to follow us down there. I followed, Sarah right behind me, clutching the railing with white knuckles. The air grew colder with each step. My breath came out in pale clouds. After a dozen steps, my boots hit dirt instead of wood. The light from the hatch was gone. The only glow was from something faint ahead. The space opened into a low tunnel. The walls weren't just dirt. They were lined with something hard and pale. For a moment, I thought it was stone, until I noticed the rounded shapes. Eye sockets, jaw bones, fingers curled into the soil like roots. God, Sarah whispered. The faint light grew stronger as we moved. It came from deeper down, flickering like fire, but with a greenish tint. The tunnel turned sharply, and when we stepped around the bend, the ground fell away into a cavern. The ceiling dripped with moisture, the sound echoing. In the center, a pit glowed with that sick green light, as if the earth itself was alive. Shapes moved around it, dozens of them, hunched and shuffling, their skin gray and stretched tight over bone. None of them had eyes, just smooth skin where they should have been. They turned their heads toward us anyway, as if they could feel us there. From the pit, the voice spoke again, but now it was layered, hundreds of whispers in unison. Welcome back. My knees almost gave out. "Back?" I whispered. Jake's breathing was ragged. "We've never been here before." But I think we both knew that wasn't true. The eyeless things began to move toward us, their steps matching that same 3-beat rhythm we'd heard knocking at the cabin. The air thickened, pressing against my chest. From the pit, something rose. Not a shape this time, a shadow, massive, filling the space above the glowing earth. It had no face, but its edges pulsed like it was breathing. Sarah screamed and grabbed my arm. "We're leaving!" We turned back toward the tunnel, but it wasn't there anymore. Just more dirt wall. The voice laughed, a low rumbling sound that shook the cavern floor. No doors, no forest, only down. The eyeless things were almost on us. Their hands reached out, long fingers curling in the air. One brushed my sleeve, ice cold, almost burning. Jake grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it at the shadow in the pit. The stone vanished into the green glow without a sound. The shadow didn't even flinch. It spoke again. "Down is forever." The floor shifted beneath us, not crumbling, but moving, like the entire cavern was breathing. A pull came from the pit, gentle at first, then stronger, tugging us toward the edge. My feet slid on the damp dirt. Sarah lost her balance, falling to her knees. The eyeless things didn't seem affected by the pull. They walked easily toward us, as if the pit wanted them close. Jake grabbed Sarah and hauled her up, shouting over the roar in my ears. "We fight it!" But the ground kept tilting, the pit kept pulling. And then from somewhere deep below that green glow came one last whisper, so close it could have been inside my skull. One more step. The pull from the pit was stronger now. Not like wind, not like water, it was something deeper, like gravity itself had shifted just for us. My boots scraped uselessly against the damp dirt, but each second I slid an inch closer. Jake had one arm wrapped around Sarah, the other braced against the wall, or what used to be a wall. Now the surface was soft, like the earth had turned to muscle. It flexed under his palm. The eyeless things kept coming, their heads tilted, faces turned in that awful, knowing way. They didn't hurry. They didn't need to. From the pit, the shadow rose higher, towering until its top scraped the dripping cavern ceiling. The green light burned brighter, but it didn't warm. If anything, the cold dug deeper into my bones. The voice came again, not booming this time, but gentle, almost coaxing. "One step and you'll stop running." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "We're not staying here." The thing chuckled. "You've always stayed here. You just keep forgetting." Jake gritted his teeth. "Liar." But something in the way the shadow swayed, it felt like recognition. Not of our names, not of our faces, but of us. Like we'd been here before. Like it was true. Sarah's eyes darted to the pit. "I've dreamed this," she whispered. "I didn't remember until now, but I've been here." The pull grew stronger. I had to lean forward to stay upright. My toes edged toward the lip. The green glow was almost hypnotic, alive, swirling, full of shapes that moved like people underwater. Faces, arms, mouths, all reaching upward. And then I realized the faces looked familiar. Not just us, but the people from the black and white photos in the cabin. The same wide, desperate eyes. One of the faces looked straight at me and mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I could read the words. "Don't." The whispering stopped. The shadow froze. Then the ground beneath me shifted violently, tilting toward the pit. I fell forward, catching myself on my hands, dirt packed under my nails. The eyeless things were at my back now, cold fingers curling around my shoulders. Jake roared and let go of Sarah, swinging at them with a broken board he must have grabbed from the tunnel floor. It splintered on the first impact, but the creature stumbled back, not from pain, from the light. I realized then, they didn't like the green glow. They weren't being pulled. They were keeping their distance from the pit's edge. I shoved one off me and scrambled to my feet. The light! They're afraid of it! Jake looked at the pit, then back at me. So we throw it in? The shadow moved then, its shape shifting into something almost human for a moment. Tall, lean, long arms, but its head wrong, stretched, featureless except for those two pale glints. No more games, it said. The pole became a yank. My heels lifted off the ground. Jake grabbed my arm, planting his feet, but I could feel him sliding too. Sarah clung to his back, sobbing. And then the earth behind us split open. It wasn't a collapse, it was deliberate. A new tunnel, sloping upward, light spilling faintly from the far end. Not green light, warm, gold light. We didn't question it. Jake shoved Sarah toward it. Go! The eyeless things moved fast now, lunging to block us. One grabbed my jacket, ripping the fabric. Another's hand clamped around my wrist, and I swear I felt the cold burn into my bones. I kicked, shoved, and Jake barreled through them, dragging both of us into the new tunnel. The pull from the pit lessened with each step, but the shadow's voice followed. You'll come back. You always come back. The gold light grew brighter, almost blinding. My lungs burned from the cold, from the run. Sarah stumbled, but Jake kept her moving, his arm around her waist. And then, we were outside. Only, it wasn't the forest. It was the cabin. The real cabin. The one we'd arrived at days ago. Red paint, solid roof, rug still in the corner. The sun was low in the sky, staining the trees orange. Birds chirped. No fog. For a long time, none of us spoke. Finally, Sarah asked, "Was it a dream?" Jake shook his head. Dreams don't leave bruises. He held up his arm. 4 long, dark marks where something had gripped him. I stepped forward and pushed open the door. The cabin smelled normal. Dusty, sure, but not rotten. The photos on the wall were gone. The hatch in the floor was closed, the boards nailed down tight. But when I looked closer, the nails weren't rusted. They were new. Fresh wood dust clung to the edges. Sarah noticed it too. Someone's been here. Recently. A shiver ran through me, even in the warm air. Or something. Jake didn't unpack. Neither did I. We left within the hour, bags tossed into the back of the car. The road out felt shorter this time. The trees didn't lean in. The light stayed bright. When we hit the main highway, Sarah finally exhaled. So we just leave it there? Whatever it is? I didn't answer right away. I kept thinking about the face in the green glow, the one that mouthed, "Don't." I kept thinking about the voice saying we'd always come back. When we reached the gas station outside Millwood, I got out to stretch my legs. The man behind the counter glanced at me and froze halfway through bagging chips. "You were up by the old cabin?" he asked. I turned slowly. "Yeah." He shook his head. "Thought they tore that place down 20 years ago. After, you know." He didn't finish the sentence. "What happened?" I asked. The man looked at me for a long moment. "People went missing. Always in threes." I didn't tell him my name. Back in the car, we drove on. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the road. Every now and then I glanced in the rearview mirror. For the most part, it was empty. But just before the last bend out of Millwood, I saw it. In the far distance, between the trees, a faint green glow. And for a second, just a second, I thought I saw two pale eyes looking right back at me. We got out of Millwood before dark, or at least most of us did. I still hear it sometimes. 3 slow knocks in the dead of night. I tell myself it's nothing, but deep down, I know. Part of me never left that cabin. And if you ever see the fog, or a road that feels wrong somehow, turn back, because some roads don't lead you home. They lead you back.